Welcome to the K-Arts meets Ars Electronica guest lecture series about human touch. My name is Laura Welzenbach. I'm the head of Ars Electronica Export, and I hope you are comfortable right now because we have a fantastic program for about an hour for you now. I will moderate and host this session, and feel comfortable, have some snacks, have something to drink. Ars Electronica is a platform, a festival, a research lab about art, technology and society. And we collaborate with the Korean National University of Art for 3 years now. In 2022, this exchange focuses on the topic of human touch with a guest lecture series. We invited some experts from Ars Electronica side and also from Korea side for this series. The experts from Ars Electronica are Helen Starr, activist, producer and curator, Špela Petrič, researcher and activist and artist, and Robin McNicholas, co-founder, director of Marshmallow Laser Feast. After each presentation, Professor Joe, vice president of K-Arts, will join us for a conversation with the experts and himself. He is also the director of the K-Arts Festival at the Ars Electronica Festival that will happen in September 2022. So first, I would love to welcome Professor Joe. Hello, how are you today?
Good, thank you for having us. And then I really appreciate and a great pleasure to have you as a lecturer and as a collaborator. So I hope it helps our understanding of art and nature. It's very new to Korean art world and students also. So I'm very excited to see and also have your lecture and your big, broad perspective about good things for our earth and our art. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And before I give the mic to our guest today, I want to introduce her real quick. Her name is Špela Petrič. She is a media artist and scientist and has a PhD in biology. I admire her work so much, and I have also the great pleasure to work with her on various projects here at Ars Electronica. Currently, the Slovenian artist is a researcher a postdoc researcher at the Smart Hybrid Forms Lab in Amsterdam, where she is also currently based. Besides Ljubljana, that's her second base. She describes her practice as combining natural science, wet biomedia practice, performance, and critically examines the limits of the anthropocentrism via multi-species endeavors. How these multi-species endeavors work with touch, maybe, we hopefully learn more now. Špela, welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for inviting me and offering me the opportunity to share some of the recent research I've been doing, the artistic research. I'm going to start by sharing the screen. So here we go. Today I'll be talking about matters of play and passion and how I gradually transformed from plant blind are very much intensive technological societies. So to first demonstrate my point of plant blindness, I would like to show you this picture. I think it would be hard-pressed to find someone who notices the plants more than they do the rabbits in the photo. And this is a phenomenon called plant blindness, and the reasons behind it are multiple. Of course, perhaps there's a physiological reason why we are attracted to furry animals and tend to ignore plants that are sort of stationary. But in my exploration of plant life and plant ontology that started in 2014, I think, I was really also interested in the legacy of our Western metaphysics. So basically the cultural framework within which I was born, how it actually predisposes us to always treat plants as something in the background, as a living material to somehow use. So it's indeed a challenging notion to think how we can relate differently with plants if they actually don't have these qualities which humanism has established as of great value. Now, humanism was, and still is, extremely anthropocentric. So basically, it uses certain properties of the human as the yardstick according to which all of life on Earth is judged, right? So plants are in fact incredibly different in the ways that their bodies are organized, in the ways that they relate to the environment. I would argue, of course, that having a different strategy doesn't make you inferior. In fact, quite the opposite. It is because of the excess of plants that all of life on Earth is possible, right? They are our link to the main source of energy, which is the sun. However, if we were to ask about their autonomy, their individuality or interiority or even essence, all of these qualities that we ascribe to humans might not really be identifiable in the plants, right? After all, because of the way that they're able to reproduce from a cutting or a leaf, right? You can hardly say that they have an individuality. If you look at a field of grass, how many individuals are there? It's hard to say. They're also somehow very simple, right? They don't have these kind of centralized structures. We do one heart, one brain, two lungs, etc. But their body parts repeat, and each body part can actually regenerate into a whole organism. So it's also hard to speak about the essentiality. So based on the worldview that the Western philosophical canon has created and with which it permeates our every day, it's hard to think of plants yes. Okay. So I'll just, the last sentence. So according to the worldview that the Western philosophical canon has created and which sort of imbues our Western approach to life, it is hard to see plants as equal to humans. But that is just that. It's a particular context. A context that I tried to challenge through a series called Confronting Vegetal Otherness. And it's an opus consisting of 4 works which address the relation between humanness and plantness at different levels of complexity. Because early on, I realized that if I'm to prefer in general, yes? Oh no. So if I am to perform these so-called strange encounters between plants and humans, it really matters at which level I investigate them. So if we have a human and a plant, that transfer of between the two occurs at the level of the individual, and perhaps this scale is the most contested one. However, on the other hand, if we look at humans and plants in tissue culture, both are very much treated as material. And on the other side of the scale as well, if we look into deep time and the co-evolution of plants and people, for example, agricultural plants, it's hard actually to say who is domesticating whom, right? After all, humans would probably still be that made us settle down. So with this, I'm going to share with you 3 of the experiments that I did. The first one is scotopoiesis, and I asked myself what it would take for me as a human to step into the perceptual milieu of the plants and stay there to the point where I would have some proof that intercognition had happened. So I, as the human, perceive in ways that might not be correct according to the plants, but I perceive the plant. In this case, it was the cress, and vice versa. The plant also somehow perceives my presence, or whatever that means. And so, being inspired with biosemiotics and semiosis in general, I used the shadow as an index pointing to my presence in the eyes of the plant. The shadow was the sign of my presence. So this is what it looked like. I stood illuminated from behind in front of a field of cress. This cress is actually a spice that you put on sandwiches or on soups. It is originally from Africa and the Middle East, and it grows really fast because its life cycle is such that when there's the rainy season, it needs to sprout from the seeds and bloom within 2 weeks. And this was very, very convenient for me, because as much as I wanted to commit to stillness to be able to step into the perceptual milieu of the cress, I also had my limits. So this performance was done for 20 hours with breaks in between over the span of 2 days. This is the cress that some of it was growing in the light and some of it was trying to escape my shadow. And after these 20 hours, an imprint of my shadow was visible, proving that there was a morphological change in the cress because of my presence. But something else had also happened, actually. While I was standing there doing nothing, I became not just the person performing, I became the index pointing the audience towards the cress. So the whole semiotics triangle was also transformed, not just became less about me and the cress and his print and intercognition, but rather a way of facilitating attention of the audience towards the plants. So they would sit there sometimes for an hour at a time, staring at the cress, being impressed about how much it had grown, how much it had changed, and sharing stories about how they like to consume the cress. So that was a nice and surprising outcome of this experiment. The next experiment I would like to tell you about is called Strange Encounters, Cancer, Algae, and Metaphysics. And it was a micro performance taking place under the microscope, a meeting of human cancer cells and the Nanochloropsis single-celled algae. I chose these 2 organisms to perhaps controversially represent plants and humans, and actually neither are really humans or really plants, right? Because cancer we kind of consider as a pathology, even though cancer in tissue culture is a key form of human that allows us to develop all these pharmaceuticals to study the cell cycle, to actually also study the disease itself. On the other hand, Nanochloropsis is a really tough single-celled algae, actually. It's not necessarily classified as a plant, but it is photosynthetic. So when these two types of organisms met under the microscope, they interacted actually rather strangely. The cancer cells kind of ingested, some of them ingested the algae and transformed into these round shapes, which you actually see on the screen, almost harking back to this endosymbiosis, right? When sort of different organisms came together, different bacteria came together to make the first eukaryotic cell. But nevertheless, I think this was a moment to reflect on what it actually means to use biotechnology, to apply it to organisms, and how they are transformed because of they're completely out of the ecological context, or they're in the ecological context of the laboratory. All functions aside their utility for the laboratory, for whatever research they're used for, ceases to exist. And in that sense, they are infinite creatures of just a very tiny slice of life. And I think this was one of the more influential experiments within the series of Confronting Vegetal Otherness that allowed me to also rethink the relationship not only to biotechnology but to digital technologies, because in both gazes, the living is transformed in a particular way. It's sort of flattened and categorized, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But taking it even a step further, into the molecular, I went into the molecular with phytoteratology, making plant-human monsters in a sort of desire to not only connect with plants with the previous experiments, but to think about the intimacy that would be created between a person and a plant if they were to become their mother, their other mother. So phytoteratology actually proposed making plant-human monsters by using a procedure called embryogenesis. And the tail cress, which is a small weed that scientists use as a model organism to study all sorts of genetics on plants, was the donor of the original somatic cell. But through this procedure of somatic embryogenesis, a new embryo was created, this time not in the seeds, but in an artificial incubator. That's where the term ectogenesis comes from. And not only was this artificial incubator but rather it had, in addition to what the plants needed, it also had hormones that I had isolated from my urine. And if this is a question, if there's a challenge about nature, nurture, which has more influence, this was kind of my answer to the geneticization of society. Because since the Human Genome Project, a lot of focus has been made towards the genes, the genome, as that which is somehow the essence of what it means to be a certain being that is passed on through generations. And with this, I really wanted to also point to all the other conditions that actually make us, that are very much connected to the lived experience. So while the fetus is developing in a mother, be it a seed or a human mother, they are definitely exposed to all sorts of substances, some nutritional, some informational, and that also gives a sort of an imprint onto these organisms. And in that way, I became the mother of these plantlets. However, it wasn't really just me and the plants, me and Arabidopsis, me and plant monsters. There was a significant third entity present, and this was biotechnology itself, which sort of set the rules of this interaction, and also significantly impacted the aesthetics, because we had to follow the rules of sterility, of temperature control, of the whole protocol of embryogenesis. And in a way, it made the plants themselves actually quite precarious. This is in stark contrast to what the plants are actually in the wild, where the Arabidopsis tail cress actually grows quite happily in ruderal conditions. So you can see it sort of by construction sites or railway tracks. And I think that was also a key insight for my next projects. So with all this experience of confronting vegetal otherness, I had really grown to love and appreciate plants. And I turned my attention, like I mentioned, to the other partner essential in biomedia. So biomedia, as Eugene Thacker defines it, is the paradigm of conflating living and information. Because of this particular gaze, we are able to understand living as containing information. And as such, it can also be transferred to the computers, simulated, digitally augmented, and then the digital interventions could be somehow copy-pasted back onto the organism, right? So clearly, it's not just the tools of molecular biology, the enzymes, the solutions, the protocols, but also the presence of computation, especially supercomputing, especially these novel models of metabolism, the databases, the big data, the data mining that allows us to know the living more. And in fact, this principle is not only reserved for scientific endeavors, as we are very much aware in 2022. Our behavior is being tracked and stored and ordered, organized, manipulated, etc., in much a similar way. So we might not even need to go as far as donating some cells to be analyzed. We are basically digitizing our experience, our behavior, just by interacting with social networks, walking on the street, swiping a benefit card. So in this sense, much of our lived experience as humans, not only as cells of humans, is becoming similar to how agricultural plants have been looked upon for quite a while. So in agriculture, in fact, a lot of, I would say that agriculture is sort of the test bed for new emerging technologies because of this imperative for optimization of food production. Everything that can be used in terms of measuring of crops, surveilling the conditions, predicting when to harvest, etc. If it is possible to use it, it will be used. Not much ethical consideration is given to that, to crops as such. So in light of the algorithms, in light of this AI that is continuously sort of looking over our shoulder, I have seen that us as people and plants, have entered a different type of alliance. We are now all considered, in my eyes, the vegetarians. the vegetarian is a term that was coined by Kate Sandland. I'm not absolutely certain that she intended it to be used in this way. But for me, it marks a point of a shift of perspective. When I am no longer trying to rescue the plants from the background, the scenery, but rather I see us in relation to the algorithms as occupying a similar position. Both the plants and us as people are being surveilled, data is extracted, it is categorized in certain ways, and we're described in the digital realm in a way that doesn't necessarily correspond to what we are as humans and the complexity that we would otherwise think we're affording to human individuals, right? So this statistical human is actually treated in much the same way we have been treating plants. And the point of departure for the next series, which I will be demonstrating, it's part of the plant machine series that I have been actually developing at the VU during the postdoc. So this series demonstrates or even plays around with the possibilities of the relation in the vegetarian. So if we assume that this is true, what can the vegetarians do? How can we rethink the relation to the algorithm if we are also plants? And I would like to start by introducing a first project. It was sort of a short sketch of what it would be, what would it be like if we knew what plants are saying. And this is, of course, very interesting. It's very much within this enchantment that we're trying to pursue. We're trying to find a connection with plants. And of course, we think that technology can assist us in doing this. This project, Institute for Inconspicuous Languages Reading Lips, takes this notion quite literally and tries to read the lips of plants. And I will just show you the video now.
Isto mama, ma che muce ga, sponti se vidi ga, mama ga. Wow.
So what we were watching were these leaf pores, stomata, which are actually microscopic, and there are thousands of them underneath each leaf. They're basically acting in a similar way to mouths. It is through stomata that exchange of gases happens. So this is where the air comes in and the water goes out, and CO2 goes out as well. But they also have an important function in protecting the plant from the outside. They are basically the barrier to the outside. So if you watch stomata under a microscope and create a time lapse of their opening and closing, they actually do look a little bit like mouths. So this trick of the perception is called apophenia. And it is not hard to imagine this as a human, but it wasn't too hard to get the AI LipNet, which is an open source algorithm trained on human lips, to see them as mouths either. So sort of the weird phrases, mer, re, ti, ko, that come out of the LipNet, reading the lips of the stomata of the plant, or the same Boyan Mort, who is an interpreter for the deaf, trying to do so. We see our humorous insistence to communicate with plants on human terms, that is, with language. While at the same time, as we stand beside the Tradescantia zebrina, which was the plant whose lips we were reading, the inch plant it's called in English, we are already communicating with it. We have been communicating with plants since ever. It is through the fact that we are releasing volatile organic compounds that the plants can smell. It is through the fact that we are eating plants all the time. It is through the fact that while we take a leak somewhere on the grass, someplace in nature, we are already sending information about our presence to the plants. And I thought that that was actually a really interesting point to make at this time when we are using technology to interface with the non-human nature. So let's be careful a little bit about that, or let's give it another thought. The next project that sort of also takes the realization of the vegetarians is inspired by the tropical plants that myself, but also numerous others, have accumulated during COVID in our apartments. All these plants have a very particular aesthetic and very particular capacities. So mostly they're from the tropical and subtropical areas. They're really sexy to look at. And also they can sort of withstand the conditions of being inside. So most of them actually like bright light, but not direct sun, which often doesn't really penetrate our houses, right? And they just sort of sit there. They are performing a sort of labor, but I was also wondering, what would it take to represent these plants in the realm of digital surveillance? So if we are plants and plants are us in the vegetariat, can we take some of these devices that are used every day to track our activities and basically have plants use them? So I was inspired by this particular.
Americans have Fitbits and pedometers in order to track their physical activity.
But as CBS 4's Gilma Avalos reports, some people have figured out how to earn steps without ever taking one.
This man isn't doing laundry. He's asked us not to show his face because of what he is doing with his company-issued step tracker.
Put the Fitbit in a sock, hour and a half on no heat setting in the dryer, 11,000 steps. Thank you.
He's earning 11,000 steps without moving. As is the case for many employees, his pedometer is linked to company insurance incentives that can lower his payments.
You are now more involved in, well, how much is this bill? How many steps?
Companies benefit from a healthy workforce, and many are rewarding workers with freebies for getting fit. But there's also a growing movement online to cheat the system.
We're starting with 3,472 steps.
We were curious, do the hacks even work? So we ran our own unscientific test.
This does still take some effort on your part to sit here and press this button for a while. Okay, there's a minute, 35:41.
That equals about 70 steps.
So what would it be like if we were to take data of the cellular activity of these houseplants and transform them into the steps being registered by smartwatches using a very, very simple hack, the very hack we just saw on the video. So to put these smartwatches on drill machines, and these drill machines wouldn't be powered by human hands. So these drill machines wouldn't be powered by human hands, but rather by the cellular activity of the plants. And for this, we designed these amplifiers, which take electrochemical stimuli that are generated spontaneously by the plants. You can imagine this akin to signals traveling along your nerves. And then that is just amplified, that signal is amplified, and quite literally, the intensity or the steepness of this signal is then translated onto the press of the drill machine. And much as we saw the person hacking the step counter in the video, these plants are also tricking the smartwatches into counting their activity. Although it's not literally the steps that the plants are taking, it is authentically something that is happening in them. So the applications on the phone are representing the activity, the cellular activity of our household plants. This project not only opens or points to the moment of our behavioral data being collected and sold to the gluttonous big others, which is exactly what is happening. You cannot use the smartwatch without giving the application the rights to sell the data they collect further. It is also asking ourselves, do plants need to become these bioworkers / consumers for the machine of surveillance to actually be concerned with their desire? Because as bio-laborers, consumers, that is what's happening to us as humans, right? We are sort of manipulated further, and this data is extracted in order so that we can be governed. And with this, it's sort of like a question of how are we hacking these systems, which are very much hidden. Where are we hacking them? Are we hacking them at the level of the software or at the level of the interface? Here, of course, we propose the interface. And finally, what is the relationship between these systems and non-human others? Because they're very no voice. So if we are seeing legally some rivers or the Amazon rainforest get granted personhood in order to be represented, this is a strategy akin to that, only a little bit subversive, a little bit funny, and of course very much critical. And another project that was actually from an earlier date, but I thought I would share at this moment because it also takes the plants as actors, as agents that could easily be supplanted with humans. And in that way, the plants are sort of put on the same ground as humans. The project called Plant Sex Consultancy, which we created together with Dimitris Stamatis, Pei Glyn, and Yasmina Weiss in 2014. I explored exactly what the name says. We wanted to make sex toys for plants. And of course, these are just 3D prototypes, but we wanted to see if such a thing as plant-centered design could exist and what it could possibly do. We failed in the definition of sex toys because sex toys are supposed to be for pleasure. And we weren't able to actually come close to thinking about plant pleasure, but we did use scientific knowledge about the ecological relation of the plants to try to sort of remedy some of their reproductive problems or ways in which they're suboptimal, and propose these as sex toys with very much elusive names. So for the cyclamen, we designed a vibrator. The cyclamen is an interesting plant because it's pollinated by the so-called buzz pollination. So cyclamen have a pollen sac, which needs to be shaken at a certain frequency for the pollen to drop onto the back of the bee. And this was a partnership with a bee that in the process of evolution went extinct. So for thousands of years already, the cyclamen has a bit of a suboptimal sex life, not quite as efficient as it was before. And here with this vibrator, the cyclamen can receive whichever pollinator. It will always shake the flower at the right frequency. And this was how it was presented in the exhibition. We made 6 of these designs. Another one was for the carnation, the dianthus. We wanted to prevent it getting sexually transmitted diseases by this vanity lace, which sort of protects the flower and therefore reduces the probability that an insect that would carry the STD from plant to plant would infect it. Now, of course, STDs in plants are a little bit different than in humans. They are actually fungus. So the insects actually spread the fungus from flower to flower. And if there's a fungal infection going around, it's also a natural reaction for the carnation to just produce less flowers. But in this case, the flowers can be there. They're just protected by this beautiful vanity lace. And finally, I would like to talk about a project that literally is about touch, the touch between an AI robot and a cucumber plant. The project is called Play, and I wanted to see if it was possible to use this advanced technology, advanced sensorial systems in relation to agricultural plants, where the idea, the goal would not be extraction, would not be production of food, but rather if these machines could offer the possibility for us to play with plants. And when I say that we are playing with plants, in this case, the robot, the AI robot is the prosthesis, is the augmentation that allows us to enter plants' time, to keep focus on the plants as they are moving and to interact with them in this way. So the concept is premised on Johann Huizinga's analysis of Homo ludens, where he actually gives play quite an important role in society, but also mentions that play is constitutive to living organisms. It's actually, before we are challenged to be effective, to react to the things in the world, that we must learn through the process of play what our body is, how it relates to the environment, how we relate to other beings around it. And play is driven by joy. It's driven by the freedom that comes with having a body. And in that sense, I think plants also play. All organisms must. And my proposal, because it's really impossible for us to actually know how and where plants play, my proposal was to look at these plants that have these tendrils growing. The tendrils are sort of functional eventually. They are there to grab onto things, to hold, in this case, the cucumber up from the ground. But in the process, each tendril that develops opposite the leaf is there to explore the environment. It's not absolutely understood in science how it does it, what triggers it. And also I found in this project that they are somewhat unpredictable, not quite discernible. So the idea was, this is some first sketches. The idea was to make an AI, again, plant-centered, with the mission to play with plants. Not about a game, but really to allow the plant agency and the agency of this robot to express some freedom and joy. So it was a collective effort, a group of, I think at the end of 10 people, engineers, computer scientists, both specialists for machine vision and AI, builders, helpers of all sorts, philosophers, designers, etc. We came together to think long and hard about what this machine could look like, and also what the algorithm would be like. And I think in the process, we really I learned a lot about AI. It sort of was a process of demystification, because as much as I wanted the plants to be the ones that sort of tell the AI how they want to play, so as much as that desire was present, it wasn't really straightforward how to do it, because much of the AI is actually used as a tool towards a predefined goal. And here, the importance was that this should stay open and that this should develop over time. So yeah, you already can see a glimpse into the final morphology of the installation. But I would like to just take a moment to talk about what the algorithm ended up being like. So it's actually not a complicated artificial intelligence program at all. It's quite a simple neural network, an autoencoder that has a latent space where I guess the computer stores a matrix of its past experience with the cucumbers. And it is actually through this past experience that the new images, which are collected by the LiDAR scanner, are processed. So every time the LiDAR scanner takes an image of the plant, that happens every 15 minutes, the computer reacts to that image through its past experience. And sort of play happens in that way. This is a raw image of the LiDAR scan. So you can see sort of a rough surface of the plants in 3 dimensions. And this is a movie, a time lapse of how it looks when the AI robots and the cucumber plants play. So these balls are controlled by the AI. They move at approximately the plant's pace. And the decision which ball to move at which time is in the domain of the AI. Once the plant actually grabs on, the AI loses a degree of freedom, therefore transforming gradually from this active participant in play to basically a cucumber trellis. So the cucumber uses this robot as basically its support. So in time, we not only see the development of this game that happens outside of human time, a little bit slower, with rules underpinning that are completely changing the game, that rules underpinning the game that are not defined, because this is not about a game, winning or losing, it's about play. But the result is that these two entities are morphologically informed by each other. And to conclude, I would just like to also announce maybe the next stage of my artistic research. So with all these experiments around play, around AI and plants and surveillance societies and us as the vegetarians, I've come to realize that it's really important to venture outside of the space of the laboratory, outside of the space of the gallery, which is a privileged space, controlled space, a defined space, and go look at these same processes of the intimate contact between bodies and technology out in the wild. And by the wild, I'm interested in specifically agricultural processes and processes of healthcare, so medical centers, and really weird spaces like the zoo. So for the past 3 months, I have been on a residency in the Artis Zoo. This is a city zoo in Amsterdam. It's one of the oldest zoos, or the oldest zoo in the Netherlands. And I've been there not to only enjoy the animals and plants, but to think about the infrastructure of care that is put in place to maintain such a complex ecology, also a very much contested one, because we know that zoos come from this colonial period where they represented these this cabinet of curiosities of all the collection of species that nations brought from the lands they conquered. And still, despite this baggage, what the day-to-day life looks like is very much concrete. It's this care that takes shape in an unromantic way, and it's quite exhausting to maintain. There's a huge effort that goes into this. But to actually end this presentation, I would like to share a whole different experience from the zoo. And this one is connected to the way that animals in the zoo, which actually have been taken out of the wild for over 80 years. So for the past 80 years in Europe, none of the animals have been actually brought from the wild into the zoos. The animals in the zoo just reproduce in captivity. So it's several generations in, right? All of these animals have had more or less the same treatment, the same continuous care, the same sort of enrichment for generations. And yet most of the animals kind of look through you. Even though I was wearing this blue jacket marking that I am potentially going to feed them, they really didn't care that much. And then there was this. So out of all the animals in the zoo, it was wolves that are closely related to dogs and this parrot that were sort of remotely interested in me as a human, in me as a visitor, in me as a potential caretaker. And I know this may sound really trivial, but it got me thinking how we are disregarding the agency of the plants and the animals that we keep very close to us in the process of their domestication or their use. It is actually from all these hundreds of animals that are kept in the zoo that the same ones that we keep as pets or the relatives that are the ones that actually seem to also get something from us in this interaction. And for me, as a person continuously seeking to escape this guilt-ridden, self-berating discourse of post-anthropocentrism, where we continue to repeat humans are the source of everything that is ill in the environment. We are the cause of climate change. We are the cause of destruction. It is in order to change this narrative that I am looking for ways of seeing humans and seeing myself as a positive influence, as something where that as entity, not just me personally, but also in our past, has negotiated with the non-humans in our environment, and that it was sort of a mutual choice, a mutual taming, mutual joy of being together. So it is with this notion that I would like to end my presentation and share with you the obsession that I have with industrially produced tomatoes that you can find in the supermarket here in the Netherlands, probably everywhere around the world. It is an exploration that I would like to do in the future of exactly what my relationship is to this tomato, which isn't a romantic tomato that my grandma grew when she was a child in the garden and plucked everything herself in a sustainable and ecological fashion. My relationship, my intimacy with vegetables happens like this, you know, packaged in a supermarket stall, and it's the exploration of the joy and pleasure that this particular tomato provides, that I think is something to stay with and think with as we proceed forward in the time of ecological disruption, catastrophes, climate change, and the empathy which we will have to be manifesting towards nature, but also towards ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Špela. What a wonderful presentation. What a wonderful glimpse into your work. So amazing how you bring together play and humor to every single piece. This interaction between these different species, all coming together also in this vegetariat. Definitely we'll learn more about that. Yeah, I would now give the word to Professor Joe, actually. You have a few questions and maybe we can just ping pong them together a bit.
Okay. Wow, it's a great lecture. So inspiring and a bit, yeah, very touching. You touched many great issues around the nature, and so I have to maybe I have to start with some basic and general question about the art and nature things. Okay, this lecture, Human Touch, talk about how human can recognize and communicate with non-human beings, so like plants and animals. So you think AI and nature are often thought of as opposite concept, but tell me how you see AI as an extension of a human.
Yeah, in fact, my recent research into farming and intense farming has really brought this question that you posed to the fore. It's a really key question. It is actually within the genealogy of these machines that nature has been subsumed. It has been made a resource, right? So when we think about technology interfacing nature in a non-extractive, non-utilitarian manner, a post-humanist type of manner, we must be aware that we're already setting ourselves up for failure. So What I've been trying to do also with the projects is to test the boundaries of how this kind of technology that can be applied for another one. And I think this is an open question. I am also very much concerned when technology is applied. However, I'm not necessarily certain that the potential of these technologies, the potentials have been exhausted. I think that not enough effort is being put into using them differently. An example of this would be the so-called precision farming. So this is a trend that, of course, like many other technological developments, originates from the Silicon Valley, right? So it is with this latest sensors and AI that it is thought that we will optimize crop production, because we no longer have to deal with the whole field as a general single type of entity, but we could actually accommodate each plant. We could target green weeds and remove them individually while we actually leave the crop intact. But this precision, the precision in precision agriculture, actually has nothing to do with regenerating the land on which crops are produced. It has nothing to do with implementing justice for the farmers, for the lands that are actually used to produce this food. It doesn't even necessarily solve the crisis of hunger, the lack of food. It's actually yet another way of using technology to perpetuate the status quo. So I don't think that AI and these kind of really high-tech developments are necessarily leading to this, but it's a common assumption that this is what they should be doing. And I think that there is definitely a challenge ahead to see if these agricultural tools, if we're sticking to farming, can be created in such a way that would actually help permacultural practices, that would help regenerative farming, that would help agroecology. So it's not a clear answer at this moment in which direction it will go. What we know from the past is that if we don't put any effort into it, it's going to continue going into this intensive monocropping, centralized farming that is extractive and that will stay extractive at the expense of the environment and of the people.
So this, I have to give you another question. You said very early of your lecture that the plant is equal to humans. Plant and humans is very equal. So that kind of concept is very rare and very radical in especially to Korean people and students. So, but it also has some. You must have faced some ethical issues about when you're dealing with that kind of issues. So what is your thinking about that kind of concept and ideology, whatever called?
Yeah, thank you. That the question of ethics is a passenger of all my work. I think a lot of bioart or arts dealing with living organisms addresses this question. We have to. It's a way of taking also public responsibility for the relationships that we create within the artworks. In the case of the vegetarians, of course, it's a provocative statement, right? And it's meant to open up a different vantage point. It is not meant to reduce the human to a plant. Actually, quite the opposite. No, it's meant to bring attention to the fact that even when humanism situated the human on the throne, just below God, right, and above animals and plants and minerals, etc., not all people were counted to be that kind of human. So within this, the privilege that humanness brings is already a lot of discrimination. And in this vein, actually, these statements that we are all already plants, it embraces this kind of discrimination and urges us to use this empathy of being discriminated towards a change that would actually cultivate some empathy towards those that we cannot necessarily relate to in terms of kind, in terms of morphology, in terms of cultural background, you know, because of the way that computation is used as a totalizing force. It makes life transparent, and it makes it loses the nuances of our experience. And I think that it is only in this particular view that we might say, yeah, I understand what it feels like to be completely pigeonholed, you know, to be made into something that is taken out of context, out of my experience. And I am not given a choice. I mean, not really. When I am surfing online using, I don't know, Google, using Instagram, whatever, the information gathered about me works to manipulate my behavior. I cannot escape this, right? But I do not like it, the fact that this is happening to me. And it is actually through this, I disagree with this, that I can empathize with plants and say, well, if this is happening to you as well, I understand and I disagree with that for you. So it's all a little bit of a hack, right? It's not a definition. It's an invitation to think about this, to think around these boundaries that we for plants, equally for the farm, equally for the human. It's normal to have a gradated relationship and a system of care that just by caring for something, you're already killing something else. That's what care is, right? But then to allow that this care to be directed towards different entities, to actually encourage that we don't care just because society says something should be cared for, but that we are allowed the possibility to make a choice, yeah? And to choose, okay, these are the plants that I will go out of my way to keep alive, while I understand that this is also me being a consumer, me falling into the trap of social media, and me basically keeping these creatures here with a lot of difficulty. It's not normal for them, and they're dying on me all the time. Yeah? And yet the emotional labor is there, and the care is there, the love is there, right? And it's with the commitment that when you choose to engage in such relationships, of course you're performing a sort of violence, but you're opening yourself up, you're becoming vulnerable. And yeah, for me, I think this is the way out of this paralyzing guilt that we are in, right? to stop thinking of in terms of solutions or in terms of making everything better, because it's not about that. It's about, for me, introducing the multiplicity of the engagement. So you as a person can choose to care for these, and another person will care for something else. But we are unmade. We're not like in science blocked off in this hierarchy and the difference between subject and object, and the imperative that we should not make judgments about organisms that are too far removed from us. We shouldn't name plants. We shouldn't think plants have human qualities. We shouldn't think plants care about us. Yeah? And I'm trying to say, okay, I understand. But what happens if we do? What are the consequences if I do grant plants personhood? What changes? What changes for my joy in life? And what changes for the perspective of these plants in the future?
Hey, thank you for your answer. It reminds me that in my class, I urge students to grow their own plants before they learn some algorithmic programming. So I think it's very close to each other, and sometimes they forgot when they say, and when they talk about the generative art, they usually forgot what the life is. They always talking about artificial intelligence in media art world, but they neglect to see what the life is. So I promote students to grow their plants, even though small or big, but I shared my small seeds and small parts to them, and I feel I have to introduce your work and you to my students, and it helps my students to have a broader perspective about what the media art would be. So yeah, so due to the COVID-19 pandemic things and climate crisis, people's perception of nature has changed a lot. You already mentioned about that. People don't take human control nature anymore. Do you have, as an activist, as a media artist, did you message about the current social issue? And also, how do you feel creativity can help save the earth and that kind of crisis?
Yeah, sort of. In part, I already addressed this with the previous answer, but maybe just to expand. I think that cultivating a good deal of humility is very encouraging to realize that it's not about total control, and that is also kind of in contrast with mechanisms of computation and modeling, predicting things, minimizing risk. And that's all, very much still an important part of society, right? So I'm not trying to at all negate the importance of technology, but I would actually encourage people and media artists as well to take responsibility for their way of life. Now, not in this way of identifying moments where you as a person are failing to live up to your own standards, what an ideal person should be, but to examine examine really closely all the areas in which, and all the ways in which we are complicit in processes that we feel are detrimental in the long run. It's, I think the key question is what to do once you have identified these elements. And here I would also encourage people, this is also what I try to do, is to run with this. Donna Haraway would say to stay with the trouble, not to negate the situation within which we find ourselves, and not to necessarily blame others or blame our past, but to use this negative experience and turn it into a joyful resistance, to sort of create resilience through or despite the pain that we might encounter when we see, oh yeah, well, a lot of these things that I would like to see change are impossible for me to do anything about. And what's worse, I am actually making it worse. So to take that realization and then say, yes, but I still want to have a joyful life. What can I do as a person? What kind of relations can I build? And this is something where also a lot of creativity should be injected. So each person should have a completely different answer to this question. And within this diversity, within this multiplicity, I think we could then finally, get someplace else than where we are heading at now. Yeah, that's sort of like my trajectory. It's utopian, of course, but yeah, it keeps me motivated and happy.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Do you have one more question, Professor Cho? Or
No.
I guess, yeah.
Perfect.
I guess there's so
Anna,
many questions that are open now, right? There are so many inputs that we can think about now, and I hope that your students have the chance to maybe dig deeper in one or the other idea in their little working groups also around the class.
There are many questions I would like to ask, but because of time limits, I'm going to email you.
I think that's also a great way to get the conversation going, just like use the digital for further exchange. I think that's a good idea. So thank you so much. Oh yeah, Professor Cho, you want to add something?
Just my personal question. Have you ever chance to visit in Asia country before?
Yes, I've been to Seoul, actually.
Oh, really?
And to Taiwan and Indonesia, so Southeast Asia a little bit, Singapore, that area.
Okay, so hope we can someday in Seoul.
Yeah, so you now know who to contact when you're in Seoul, Špela, and maybe we can also find ways with our future collaboration to find further exchange here. All right, I think I wanted to say thank you also to Professor Cho, your team, and Hannah, and all the team that is behind there. And I wanted to thank Ferenc and Armin on Ars Electronica side for their help. Big round of applause, and I hope the students have fun with the lecture series and also with the other presentations. Check them out and stay tuned. We will have more coming. Thank you so much for your attention. We'll be in touch. Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen. Bye bye.
Wiedersehen.